welcome to today's episode of Date in a Blink, where we're joined by Cora Boyd, a love life expert, content creator, and the founder of Cora Boyd Enterprises.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a bit. It's totally free, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other podcasting platforms. Not only that, but it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It also lets you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make your podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Today on Date in a Blink, we are so excited to be joined by the founder of Cora Boyd Enterprises herself, Cora Boyd. Her enterprise is a boutique love life consultancy and creative lifestyle brand. They serve a global community through dating and relationship coaching, motivational content on creative fulfillment and life satisfaction, and immersive educational experiences around flirting, communication, charisma, social magnetism, and optimal interpersonal relating. Cora is also the host of the podcast Pillow Talk Radio and has contributed thought pieces to Tinder Swipe Life, the Gottman Institute, and Thought Catalog, and has been featured by NPR, Bumble, Elite Daily, and so many more. A former top-performing matchmaker for a Stanford Startups company founded by Elle Magazine's E. Jean Carroll, Cora established her love life consultancy in 2019 and has since guided hundreds of clients into the most fulfilling, incendiary, and romantic relationships of their lives. With such an impressive background, Cora, welcome. We are so happy to have you here today. So, Cora, on your most recent episode, I think your most recent episode of your podcast, Pillow Talk, it's titled Do Whatever the F You Want, and you talk about the constraints of a rule book that doesn't actually exist. And I think it's safe to say that the pressures of that rule book are felt in most people's day-to-day lives. So what would you say are some of the expectations and confines in the dating and relationship world, and how can one start to break free of them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, what I've observed and what I've noticed working in the dating space, and I've been working in the dating space for, 6 years now. First as a matchmaker for 2 years, and then 4 years doing love life consulting and education and coaching. And what I have observed trips us up a lot is this idea that there is this rule book, or is this idea that like how long should you wait to text? Who should text first? When should you have sex? Who asks who out? Who pays for the bill? Blah, 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 blah. There's all these things that kind of feel like rules. And then what I've noticed and why I'm really passionate about creating this space, kind of this educational space around love life, dating, and relationships is that it's a part of life that's so it's so important. It's so important. It's so essential to our happiness, to our sense of personal confidence, and to our sense of magic and romance in life. And it's also something that most of us learn kind of unconsciously and haphazardly in some form or another. So I ask this to my clients all the time, typically at the beginning of programs, especially my signature program, Magnetics Love School, where I'll ask them to reflect on where they learn to date and how they learn to date. And the question is usually some sort of smorgasbord of movies. And usually, like, depending on how old someone is, most of my clients are millennials. But it's usually like early 2000s movies, which, if you watch now, it's like,
cringe.
Good God. Yeah. Who let them get away? It's astounding what was like put forth as like cultural norms so recently. And, I also dating, and I'm bisexual. I mostly, my sphere of expertise is really in the hetero dating space. So when we look at that, what we're really looking at is it's a microcosm of gender dynamics and gender politics in a different way. So when you look at, okay, if we're learning from like really like regressive movies and like things that, you know, maybe we heard our sister's friend tell us when she was like 16, and it just like ingrains in our subconscious, and we're like, oh yes, men are like this, or girls want this. And or, you know, we receive dating and love life advice from people who we wouldn't necessarily want the experience they're having, the romantic experience we're having. And a lot of it we learn from what's modeled to us, which there can be many great things, but our subconscious just kind of takes that all at face value as we're developing this concept of how to date, like what are the rules of dating, what's okay, what's not, who does what when. And when you take into account, and this is another really big thing I see, and also part of why I'm really really passionate about working with men specifically, and I do work with women as well, but my main focus and speciality is working with hetero men to better understand and connect with women. But it's shifting as dynamics between men and women shift, and some things are not shifting. There's certain heteronormative preferences that I think what we all need to do is, you know, there are certain things that we might deem quote traditional, aka heteronormative, and some of those things are really wonderful, and some of those things are kind of toxic, and it's up to us to untangle the wonderful from the toxic in that. So all of this is to say, very long-winded response to your question, but what I've seen is, or why I'm passionate about creating these spaces where people can open up this space in their lives as adults to really give the time and the attention to this part of their life that's really important to them, and bring like consciousness to it, bring mindfulness to it, and really question, oh, like, why do I think that that's the rule? Where did that even come from? Is that something I want to abide by in my life or not? And what I do teach my clients is like, it's not, you know, sometimes when I tell people there's no rule book, there's no rules, that can feel kind of intimidating, because it's like, okay, well, what am I doing wandering around in the dark with no structure or guidelines? And it's not really that. It's there's energetics, there's certain dynamics, there's certain things that you get to and need to understand. There's etiquette, but it's really about understanding why certain practices of etiquette are in place, and why, like, you know, who pays for the bill, for example. It's not really about the money, it's about the gesture, and what that gesture represents. So it's really about kind of understanding the dynamics and the energetics and etiquette, and understanding, for example, like who texts who when. Well, it depends on the entire context of who's been investing. What does the reciprocated investment look like? Like it's just more nuanced than that. So it's about understanding this invisible language of the energetics and the dynamics, and aligning that with your personal preferences and what you want to create, because whatever, you know, quote, rule we may have internalized at a younger age from unconsciously from movies or wherever might not actually be aligned with or set us up to experience what we want to experience. It might be something different that we don't actually want. So it's really about understanding the underlying factors, questioning our assumptions, and bringing our adult consciousness and experience to it. That's really what I mean when it's like there isn't rules, but there are guidelines, and once you understand the full context and the full picture, then you get to use your discernment and make intentional, informed choices at every juncture.
I think the example of texting is one that really resonates with me. I haven't been dating anytime recently, but I remember when I was on the dating scene, the game of, they responded X number of hours later. What does that mean? Or they haven't responded yet. Maybe they're just waiting. Or when do I respond? And what does that say? And I remember when I started talking to my current partner, there weren't any games like that. Like I never had to feel like he was holding out on me. If he wasn't responding, I knew it was probably because he was at work or whatever. Like it took out a lot of the anxiety because we just didn't really follow that quote unquote rule book that really shouldn't be a rule book at all. And so I think that's one that really is very prevalent even today. Even you gave a long list of examples in the beginning, and I think they're all very valid places where we impose these rules on ourselves just because of what we've seen externally. And it really doesn't serve us oftentimes. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, I love that example. And it's such a good point too, where there is discernment, there is strategy, there is some intentionality and calculation. And your now partner probably, if he wasn't responding because he wasn't working, you weren't double texting him because you understood the energetics of reciprocation and space and exactly. So it's you're letting your understanding of the context and the energetics and the dynamic and reading the dynamic that's happening inform your next move, not the guesswork and anxiety of the quote supposed to.
Right. So I think this goes really well with our next question. So in one of your blog posts entitled How to Impress Your Crush on a Date, the second item listed is keep it real, which is something that can feel really obvious, but can also be really hard to do when you're sitting across from someone that you really want to impress, or you're trying to figure out what to send them in a text. And I'm wondering what pointers you have for keeping it real on a date and how you can kind of fend off that temptation to sprinkle in or have those rule book kind of things impose on you and change how you're going to behave.
Yeah, also great question. So the skill and the mindset, especially in the early stages of dating, we all want to put our best foot forward and we want to put our best. What I say to my clients sometimes, it's your best foot, but it's still your foot. It's not someone else's foot. It's not a prosthetic foot you bought off the internet. It's your foot and you've washed it and maybe painted your toenails and, made your foot look presentable, but it's still your foot. So that's kind of the analogy I think of when it's when I talk about keeping it real on dates. So it's pairing that that authenticity with the desire, and not just the desire, but the courtesy of putting our best foot forward. And what I mean by that is, we do want to impress this person, and they want to impress us, and that's kind of cute of both of us because we want to make a good impression. That's part of dating. I think
it would be weird if they didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's not showing up with, dirt, your figurative foot, dirty and your toenails all long and being well, if they can't handle my foot at its worst, they don't deserve, right? I feel sometimes people can kind of, have a reaction, or I've noticed that paradigm or that school of thought where it's okay, just put it all out there right away. And if they can't, this is it. If they can't handle it, fuck them. But really, I mean, that's really a fear-based, there's fear in that motivation because it's it's usually because we've been hurt or someone doesn't, find something out about us later, or, we're in some capacity, we're not fully open, or we're there's a kind of pushing away at fear-based energy underneath that. So it's acknowledging that this really the jackpot balance with this is acknowledging and owning that we do want to impress them and they want to impress us, and it's cute of both of us. And of course we want to make a good impression. So, there is, again, as I was saying in the last response, there is strategy, there is some calculation. We even heard that a little bit in the date with Rebecca and Jay, where they ask you a question and you might use it as a segue to showcase something about yourself that you're proud of, or that is attractive about you. Like you're a really good dancer, and you have, so you are, you're presenting the best of yourself and the parts of yourself that you're most proud of, and that you find or hope they will find to be most attractive. And that's great. But you're also being real. You're not making things up. So you can intentionally sprinkle in these things that you hope they'll find impressive. And, maybe you have some go-to flirting boobs or jokes that you know tend to read well on dates, and you pull those out of your pocket, and like, that's fine. There's no problem with that, so long as it's authentic to who you are and authentic to you. So it really is this balance of presenting well and impress them. Absolutely.
Make with your own foot. That's the takeaway.
Yeah, it's like, it's still your foot.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an analogy I'd never heard before, so I'm like latched on. I'm sorry. It's so good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how I feel like a lot of dating advice that we hear a lot, especially nowadays, because 7-second TikTok videos are what keeps people's attention. So oftentimes we lose a lot of the nuance in terms of these different tips and advice that exist, because it's not as extreme as the quote, "If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." And it's like, well, yeah, but they don't even know you at all at that point. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So I love that what you're saying is that don't be inauthentic on a first date, but rather it's something that you've talked about where, or I can't remember if it was in the podcast or somewhere that we saw you wrote about it, but where you said like, a date is a preview of a potential relationship. And I think that is so key to a lot of what you're already talking about. And I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into this. And so one of the things that you pointed out is that not in this call right here, but even small things like pouring someone else's glass of water when you pour your own can be a sign of how someone's going to be a partner long term. And so I love this idea of like, what are some things that are the preview of what's to come, especially if something, is it second nature for someone? Are they being really showy about it? Are they going out of their way? And I think that really speaks to kind of everything that you're talking about. But all that being said, sometimes on a date, it's easier to lean into those courtesies because there's all of this pressure that's building. So building off of kind of this whole conversation, how would you recommend for people to find balance between being courteous while still kind of keeping it real?
Yeah. So you made a really good point, which is that, if they can't take me at my worst, they don't, whatever we were saying of like, well, they don't even know you at your best. And that's another really, really important thing to keep in mind in dating, and especially in early dating. But this can be helpful for just keeping things in perspective, which is so necessary. I talk to my clients a lot about the art of discernment and really like the open line of communication between your logic and your emotions, and how necessary that skill is in dating. And I think that's super true, especially in the initial dates where like maybe we have an incredible time, we get so excited, but it's tempering that with the perspective of like, okay, like that was great. I like what I see so far. I have enjoyed this so far. And I don't know this person very well. I have only seen them in one context, and also in a context where they were, of course, trying to make the best impression on me. Cool. Like I'm into it, and let's keep seeing how it goes. So tempering it with that perspective. And then on the flip side of that, it can be that mindset can be really helpful for helping to alleviate the keen sting of rejection, which, happens to all of us sometimes, where it's like, okay, that person doesn't want to see me again. well, they actually don't even really know me. All they know of me is like an hour. They know literally the tip of the iceberg. So it's not really a rejection of the fullness of me. It's for whatever reason they were not feeling it. It wasn't a match, and I can redirect my attention from there. So keeping that in mind. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick aside. This is really relevant for something that an expert for the episode we just posted today said that she tells her clients when they're rejected and don't know why to just imagine that it's something positive, like their sense of humor was so good that it was threatening the other person, or they look like their mother. So it has nothing to do with anything bad. It just wasn't a fit for some silly reason. So it just seemed very relevant to what you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah. So to your question of a date being a preview of a potential relationship, I think that the process of dating, as I was just saying, on our first date, we've only seen the person in one context. So it's important to acknowledge that getting to know someone isn't just about, it's not just about what they tell you, it's about what they show you. And that's where, it's wise to temper our investment as we get to know someone in different contexts. So that doesn't just mean that they're sharing more things verbally about themselves and we're sharing more things verbally about ourselves. It's actually through observation of like, okay, what are they like in a crowd setting, right? What are they like in a social setting with people they haven't known? What are they like at a restaurant? What are they like? You're really like getting to the feel for someone's character through observing them in these different contexts, and observing also how they respond to stress, how they respond when you set a boundary, all of these things that are telling you, who is this person, not just who they're telling me they are verbally. So it's both, but that's really what I mean when I say a date is a preview of a potential relationship, where it's you're getting to experience someone, how they treat you, how they orient themselves towards you. You're also getting to experience them and how they behave and orient themselves with other people. You're getting, like, if you pay attention beyond just what they're wanting to show you, you're going to gather a lot of information. And then there was a second part to that question, which was, what was the second part?
I think the second part was, how do you keep it real?
Yeah. So how do you keep it real? Though another piece of advice for keeping it real is finding ways to relax. So finding ways both to relax yourself and to create an environment with the other person, and like as a pair to create an environment with each other where you can both be relaxed and put your guard down. So that means that you are not being super judgmental of the other person. And that what's important here is like not just verbally, not just in what you say literally, but energetically. Like, are you setting a climate in the conversation where they truly feel comfortable to come out and be vulnerable and show these different parts of themselves, and vice versa? And that doesn't mean you can't, poke some fun at each other or challenge each other or disagree on things, but you're going to get the most authentic version of someone, and they're going to get the most authentic version of you in a context and a tone where you both feel some warmth and you both feel that there's an open floor to say what you really think, and to if you're tired and you've had a long week, to share where you're really at, like to not pretend that you're something or someone that you're not, or that whatever it might be. But I think that's a really important thing, is looking at, okay, what can I do to participate in creating a setting and a tone where in this conversation on this date, we can both be relaxed. There's warmth, there's openness, there's genuine curiosity, and there's not a judgmental tone. And then on a personal level, looking at, okay, like, I mean, a huge part of, I teach a lot about magnetism too, which is really we're most magnetic when we are living a life that we love, we are well rested, we are taking good care of ourselves, we are our energy is we have a good energy level, and that's not to say like you're super energetic, but like you feel grounded, you feel relaxed, you feel rested, you're not kind of on edge. That's when our energy is the most attractive, when we're kind of energized by life and grounded. So outside of the context of just the one date, it's really about your lifestyle and making sure that you're taking really good care of yourself, and because that's what's going to make you feel most attractive and kind of emit that magnetic energy. So it's looking at, okay, what do I need to do pre-date in order to feel most relaxed? Do I need to exercise today? Do I need to have make sure I have ample time to get ready? Whatever it is for you, do I need to meditate that day? But just kind of preparing your energy so that you can feel grounded and relaxed, and that's going to help you. It's going to help emit that energy for the other person, and it's also going to help you not feel the pressure to put on airs as much.
One thing that just came up for me as you were talking about this is your mental state and your surroundings have a much greater impact, I think, than people realize. And I was recently reading How to Not Die Alone by Logan Ury. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's
yet.
Highly recommend it. It's phenomenal. She has some really incredible insights in her own PhD research on kind of relationship psychology. And one of the things that she talks about is, a lot of times we're trying to fit in dating wherever we can. So, you have a 7 a.m. coffee date, and it's like, well, 7 a.m. coffee date when you're about to start your workday, chances are very likely that you're very preoccupied and you're not necessarily feeling super sexy in that moment. And so you're kind of already setting that getting to know you environment up for failure, because you're putting all these things that make it less romantic and sensual and something that's a lot more clinical. And so you're like, oh, I just didn't feel any warm and fuzzies. It's like, well, I don't know about you, but I don't feel any warm and fuzzies before like 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's just something that's coming. Yeah, it's something that's really coming up for me a lot, and kind of what you're sharing about. There's so much that goes into it just above and beyond when you're coming to a date. It's not, you want as much as possible, I think is what you're saying, to kind of be present in that moment and to have a sense of awareness and presence. But there are all these other factors to take into consideration that can really impact how you feel and how you present yourself in this moment. So big fan of that.
Yeah, I love that. It's really about bringing intention to the time together. And even the example you gave, it's like, what a tone to start a relationship of just like convenience and kind of transaction and low priority, right? It's like that energy gets infused into the relationship, because that's what we know of each other, that energy, that tone. So it's, again, what do we want to experience in the energy of the relationship? Intentionality, consciousness, consideration, presence. So it's setting yourself up both personally in your energy, and also in terms of how you're choosing to spend time together and when you're choosing to spend time together. So another example of keeping it real and courteous could be, you're exhausted, you had a crazy work week, you're supposed to have a date on Thursday and it's Tuesday, and you just know that you're going to be a frayed nerve by Thursday, and you're not going to be able to be present. You could reach out to that person and be like, hey, I actually am having a wild week at work. I'm a little overextended, and I really want to be present for our date. Would you mind rescheduling so that, I can make sure to be rested and my most charming self, or whatever you want to say. But like, that's a good example of keeping it real and courteous.
That's such helpful advice. Changing gears a little bit, I have a slightly different question.
Mm-hmm.
So social media allows us to constantly brand and rebrand ourselves. And sometimes it can be deceiving, but it can also be a really fun tool for self-exploration. I'm wondering if you have any advice for our listeners when it comes to finding a balance between an online version of ourselves and that in real life, authentic, real version of ourselves. Are they the same? Do you think they're different? How do we navigate that?
Yeah. Great questions all around. I think that my answer to this is somewhat similar, just in a different context. And I feel it is really connected, especially if we're talking about online dating too, where like that is such an example, like creating an online dating profile or creating a social media page. It's this same thing of like, you're putting your best foot forward, you're curating, you're presenting, your foot in the best light, but it's still your foot. So similar thing here with social media, where, again, it's like, what's your intention with it? Why are you using it? What are you getting from it? So also keeping in perspective what it is and what it's not. Something I talk to my clients a lot about. I actually also coach them on utilizing social media as a way to meet dates too. But something I talk to my clients a lot about is just really understanding the psychology behind it, and that both social media and dating apps are literally psychologically designed like slot machines. So they're literally, yeah, they are both literally psychologically addictive, and gamified to give us dopamine hits of perceived connection. And that's not to say that it's not real connection, but it's a form of connection that, we don't have all the information for. We don't have the read of this person's body language. We don't have the read of this person's scent. We don't have the full scope of information. And so it's really easy to project shit onto the conversation or the dynamic or the other person, to an extent where, yeah, social media is a really amazing tool for connection. So is online dating. Like I said, it's not that it's not real connection. It's just that it's a certain type of connection, and it's a realm where we really have to be aware and conscious and intentional, and also discerning, and use our emotional intelligence and look at, okay, like where am I, like, what are my patterns? For example, self-awareness of like, what are our defaults? What are our patterns? Where am I assuming the absolute worst tone and what that person wrote, for example, right? Or where am I projecting a fantasy and thinking this person is like the best person in the world, and imagining like my wedding with them before I've even met them in person? It's really, again, about tempering it with perspective. So keeping in mind, okay, what is this and what is it not? It's an online platform. It's a tool for connection that happens to be psychologically addictive. So we want to look at, okay, like, knowing that, how am I going to utilize this from an empowered place? So like, for example, in terms of the boundaries we have with ourselves. So something really common with online dating, and I'm kind of merging the two because I think that psychologically there's a lot of similarities. But with online dating, for example, a really common pattern that I see is what I call kind of seasons of plenty and seasons of pestilence, which is this pattern where people will, go on online and they're like, oh my God, there's all these things. Oh my God, whoa, swipe, 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 swipe. And I actually did this the first time I tried online dating. I was like, oh my God, this is so fun. Dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, burnout. Fuck this. This is terrible. I'm so demoralized. Like, I'm going to not be on this app for like 3 months. And then like, again, then the pattern plays again. So understanding that you're probably going to be psychologically addictive and want to keep going with it. I think it's important with both social media and online dating to have boundaries with yourself. So for example, I have like a kind of game I play with myself, I guess you could call it, where I have like social media units. I especially do this for TikTok, where I'll set a timer for, like, a unit is either 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And I just set a timer, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to watch TikTok. And maybe I'll be like, I'm going to watch for 3 units. Or maybe I don't set a specified thing, but the timer keeps going off and I can choose whether I want to renew it or stop or whatever. But I'm conscious of like how long I've been on there, and I'm conscious of like some sort of boundaries. So that's what I advise with clients around both social media and online dating is you have to have boundaries with yourself around how you're using it, because that's going to influence and impact your perspective of it a lot. If you're burnt out and you're like, you know, like, you're also, if you're spending so much time on there and you're having all these connections, but you're not bringing them into real life, or you're living your life more so online than you are IRL, like that's ripe territory for projections of all sorts, and you're not necessarily in touch with the reality of things, whether it's with another person or what have you. So going back to social media in particular too, I think and that question of being real and presenting well, we have to remember, well, we also know from a lot of research that, you know, there's a lot of negative correlations between happiness and a lot of social media use. So again, just being aware of that and looking at, okay, what are the benefits of this? Well, it allows me to discover new things. It allows me to discover new people. It allows me to build relationships and kind of keep in touch with people I've met. It allows me to see pictures from my friends' lives on a continuous basis. And then it's, what am I getting from this? Okay, well, it is creatively expressive for me. It is, you know, there's certain ways where it makes me feel seen, or whatever it is for you personally. And just being aware of what those are, and then utilizing it as a tool. I would say with my clients for online dating, and I think this applies for social media too, is like, use the tool, but don't let it use you. And that's where your intentionality and your consciousness with how you're engaging with it, and then also how you're perceiving other people, and understanding that for them, it's a curated representation of something as well. And that doesn't mean it's inauthentic. And, you know, I think there's also this culture of kind of the wave of realness and vulnerability on social media that I think is really important. But I think that it can start to tread a little bit into that territory of like, well, if they can't take my foot when it's dirty and my toenails are long, like, you know, and to a point where I think sometimes there can be pressure to share in a really raw, real way beyond a point that actually might feel healthy or emotionally safe for yourself. So there's no one static answer to that, but it's, again, really about that discernment with yourself of what are your logistical boundaries, knowing what it is and knowing that it's psychologically addictive, and knowing what it's not. And how are you utilizing the tool instead of letting it use you? And what are you comfortable sharing? You know, what feels exhilarating to share that's vulnerable, and what feels exposing, and like really doing good by yourself by not overexposing yourself because of the shock factor, or you think you should, or you're trying to be authentic. Like, that's another thing with authenticity. It's like, you don't have to try to be authentic. Trying to be authentic is inauthentic in itself. And we all do it sometimes, and we're not going to get it right every single time, but it's just having that awareness and that discernment. Yeah.
This is a great segue to talk about Rebecca and Jay's date. So I'm curious, in listening to their date, did you think that there were any particular conversational strengths or weaknesses, throughout their date?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really cute. I enjoyed them both immensely. I thought it was sweet. Um, I'll start with strengths. So I think they both did a good job of showing curiosity about the other one. Jay in particular asked really good questions. So he was really good at asking questions that weren't just kind of surface level and actually got at what I call like the why underneath. And those are the best kinds of questions to ask on a date or anytime you're getting to know someone, is like questions that get at not just the what, but the why. So another way I say it with my clients is like, conversationally, there's the content and there's the disposition. And like we connect on content, which is like subject matter, and we connect on disposition, which is like outlook, value system, et cetera, et cetera. So in getting to know someone, and really that's what we're doing conversationally on dates, is we're dancing between content and disposition, questions and subject matter, in order to showcase ourselves and our values, and b, suss and discern the values and lifestyle and background and likes, dislikes of the other person, and feel into whether or not that's something that feels compatible for us or compelling for us. So Jay in particular asked some good questions that went beyond the surface level and went deeper to kind of open up conversations where Rebecca was able to share like why she's into certain things or like what it does for her. And we heard that particularly too when like we start to hear them connecting around disposition, aka values, when he's asking her about the dancing and her background in dancing, and then he's telling her about the long walks that he likes to go on. So they're actually connecting on both content and disposition there, where they're connecting on the content of like, oh, we both like to go on walks. And then I really liked how he was like, oh, I feel it's similar for me, like dancing is for you, where it helps me to find my center, which was a really good way of kind of connecting on that value of like centering oneself through the body and like mindfulness, and also just finding that point of connection. So I really like that. I also think that they both did a really good job of being friendly and warm with each other, and there was more and more laughing, authentic, genuine laughing happening as the conversation progressed. So yeah, those are a couple of my observations.
Awesome. Another just question about the date. I'm wondering if you could rewind and give them one piece of advice prior to the date, what would it be?
Yeah. So both of their energies sounded fairly depleted and low. Especially more at the beginning of the conversation. And this is not to say, I don't want anyone hearing this being like, oh my God, I have to be like an Energizer bunny, like bouncing off the walls anytime I go on a date. Cause it's not really about like hyper energy. It's more about kind of the potency of your energy. So you could be, higher energy. Maybe you're really getting kind of excited talking about what you're passionate about, or something, a project you're really into at the moment. But you could also convey that potency of energy in presence and depth. And, there's kind of different volumes and ways to express that potency of energy. So that is something that I noticed in both of them, especially off the bat, is it like their energy wasn't that potent with each other, and it kind of felt like they were both like pun intended, like phoning it in energetically a little bit, and they got their energy started to heighten, or get heighten is maybe the wrong word. Their energy started to be a little bit more potent and engaged. I guess what I mean too is like engaged. They both sounded a little bit disengaged in their energy initially, which conveys a kind of like lack of interest, a lack of investment. And also, as I was saying, like on those first dates, or especially the initial dates, like we want to wield our energy intentionally, because that's really what we're picking up on with each other. It's not just the words, it's the energy. So my advice to both of them would be they both love to center themselves. So maybe she could dance before he could go for a long walk, but do something to kind of get in their body and to get their energy a little bit more potent and engaged and revitalized.
Awesome. And now the $1 million question. Date in a blink, what did you think? Did they match? And why or why not?
My read on it is that it could have gone either way. I think that the vibe, they were both definitely really nice to each other, friendly. We're starting to have a better time. We're starting to enjoy each other more. I think what I perceived was a curiosity about, like they were both starting to grow curious about the other one. I was getting more platonic than flirty vibes. That would be actually another piece of my advice for them, is to kind of like bring in actual more flirtation, because there were points, especially at the beginning of the conversation, which again is normal, like this fucking happens, but it did feel a little bit like platonic and dry, and a little bit like an information exchange at first, especially with kind of like recommendations of like, oh yeah, I like to cook pasta, or like there wasn't a lot of juice at the beginning. So I wasn't getting like a ton of chemistry between them. I think that that was starting to pick up as it happens. I mean, that's how it goes. I mean, it goes a whole lot of ways, but that's not uncommon, especially on first dates. So I didn't perceive a ton of chemistry. I did perceive some curiosity. And I think that they probably pursued that curiosity and went on another date, but I didn't feel like a ton of chemistry between them, a ton of romantic chemistry. Could have developed, but it was not that developed in their conversation.
My guess as the non-host for this date was this pretty similar. I felt like they had a nice conversation. They were friendly. They were asked each other questions, but I didn't feel the spark, so to speak. So I was leaning towards they would not match, even though they probably could like have kept chatting, just because I didn't feel like you were saying, like I felt more of the platonic rather than the romantic connection.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was also my guess, or that was my guess. And Laura, I guess as the host of the episode, would you reveal what happened?
Yeah, so y'all are both spot on. There were definitely a little bit more platonic vibes than romantic vibes. It was not a match, so they didn't continue the conversation with each other. I will say I did feel similarly. I thought that there could have been some potential for them to continue the conversation, especially as I got towards the end. It felt like there was a little bit more warming up and opening up. So I think that's it was definitely really interesting. Both of them loved the format. They both really enjoyed the audio first date. They felt like it was pretty relaxed of an experience for them. But in terms of continuing the conversation together, that was pretty much the end of the road for them.
Alas.
Yes, alas.
Alas. Well, that's a really interesting example too, because it is a good example of how like there was a little bit of potential between them, not a lot. Like it just didn't seem like they had really that kind of chemistry with each other. But if they had brought in a little bit more potency of energy and flirtation off the bat, I think that they could have created a bit more of a spark together. So that's actually a really good example of how like a spark, yes, and like chemistry and rapport, it is something that to a certain extent is there or it's not, but it's also something that we create on purpose.
I love that. So, and I think this is a great segue to some of our final questions for the episode. So, as we wrap up, a question we love to ask all of our experts: do you have any words of wisdom or advice for our audience?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate. People ask me a lot what my top dating advice is, and I kind of touched on this a bit already, but just to reiterate, like the best thing that you can do for your love life is to live a life that lights you up, and to take really good care of yourself. So, because that is what gets you in environments, interfacing with people who have shared interests. That's what gives you fodder, things to talk about on dates. And, we fall in love when we feel most alive, and we're most attracted to each other when we see that life force come out in the other person. So when you're feeling alive, when you're feeling engaged, when you're feeling lit up by meeting your own desires, pursuing the things you're interested in, and taking really good care of yourself, you're going to not only be happier for yourself, you're going to meet more people, you're going to feel more confident, you're going to have more self-love, and you're going to, as a byproduct of that, you're going to be more attractive to other people, be more magnetic and alluring to other people, and be perceived as kind of living in your value. And I was going to say high value, and that is the term I use, but I always put that with the caveat of like, it's not to say that someone who is, quote, romantically high value is inherently higher value than someone who is behaving in a low value way, but it's your behaving and making decisions and communicating from a place of knowing your own value rather than from a place of not. And that's what's attractive. Yeah. So that's my final nugget for the audience is best thing you can do. And this applies for whether you're actively dating or you're actively in a romantic relationship too, is it's continuing to nurture your own aliveness.
I love that. So thank you so much for sharing that advice and for joining us today on this podcast. And so for our very final question, how can our audience get connected with you?
Absolutely. So thank you both for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, audience, for listening. It's also been a pleasure. So you can find me online. My website is thecoraboyd.com. So THE, coraboyd.com. My Instagram is thecoraboyd.com. You can find, I'm starting to dabble a little bit more in YouTube. I'm making bad TikToks on TikTok. I'm occasionally tweeting instead of texting myself. So you can find me on those platforms. I think it's Cora Boyd on YouTube, and then it's the Cora Boyd everywhere else.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure. That's all we've got for you today. Shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Blink Date or at Date in a Blink to let us know what you think. If you want to try voice first speed dating from the comfort of your home, download the Blink Date app today. You can also sign up to participate in Date in a Blink by visiting our website at www.theblinkdate.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and look forward to talking with you again next time.